So you might have heard of Dr. Crippen.
But have you heard of Charlotte Bell, Belle Elmore, or Ethel Leneve?
Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen was hanged for the horrific murder of his wife at Pentonville Prison in 1910, by which point he had already become a household name for what was contemporarily being described as the crime of the century. Newspapers had been following the story from the discovery of Crippen's wife's body through the transatlantic manhunt that ensued to his trial and execution, and even continued to retell the story long after. In fact, his story is still being retold today, from a 1962 horror movie that shares his name, to the fact that his glasses can even be found in Madame Tussauds' infamous Chamber of Horrors. But something that is and always has been a dramatic miscarriage of justice within this story is that while Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen became a household name for his crimes, Charlotte Bell, Belle Elmore, and Ethel Leneve, the women of the story, remained in the shadows. Charlotte Bell was actually Crippen's first wife, who also died in extremely suspicious circumstances whilst he was still living in the US. In fact, these circumstances were so suspicious that Dr. Crippen's next-door neighbour is said to have seen him throw a book that struck his wife in the back of the head, causing her to fall to the floor. And yet her death was not investigated, and it was proclaimed by conflicting accounts that she died of a stroke or heart disease. Belle Elmore was Crippen's second wife, the one who he murdered in what became known as the crime of the century. And finally, the third woman of the story, Ethel Leneve. Ethel was Crippen's lover who attempted to flee with him after the crime had taken place and was arrested alongside him but later acquitted. Was she really as innocent as it was later assumed? An innocent young woman under the influence of an evil man? The evidence would suggest probably not. And yet, as a hysterical woman in 1910, it's quite probable that she literally got away with murder. It is this enormous miscarriage of justice that the tale of the crime of the century appears to be missing the vast majority of its three main characters that Hallie Rubenhold's new book, A Story of a Murder, aims to correct. It brings to light these three women and the details of their story, whether they be good or bad. I was invited, along with a few other history friends, to celebrate the launch of this book, rather appropriately at the beginning of Women's History Month, in the very cells that Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen and Ethel Leneve were held in after their arrest. Often when we focus on women's history, we focus on the retelling of the stories of women that have been either skipped over or mistold, focusing primarily on the good. But this in itself can be hugely problematic. Not all women of the past, just like today, were necessarily good people. So what I particularly love about Hallie's new book is that it brings to light not only the story of Crippen's wives, but also the story of Ethel, who was in reality probably, at the very least, an accomplice to murder.